You gave them your time, your presence, your silence when your heart was roaring to be heard. You offered loyalty, patience, and love unasked, unearned, and uninterrupted. And still, they left. But the deepest wound was not betrayal. It was confusion. That ache of looking back and asking why. Why would someone walk away from the only soul who stayed when no one else did? You thought kindness would shield you. That love, if pure enough, would return as loyalty. You weren't wrong for believing that. You were just untrained for a world that punishes unguarded hearts. Gratitude fades faster than injury. And kindness without leverage invites contempt. Machiavelli. History has proven it. Julius Caesar forgave his enemies. They bathed in his mercy, then stabbed him in the forum. Princess Diana gave love to a cold empire. And it left her exposed, even in your own life. There's that one moment, that one name you gave. They took and never looked back. What you offered in generosity, they registered as a signal of weakness. What you intended as peace, they interpreted as surrender. But this isn't your fault. You were conditioned by family, by culture, by broken myths to equate giving with virtue, to equate silence with strength, to equate sacrifice with love. But the world doesn't run on virtue. It runs on perception, and perception is brutal. People do not cherish what is always available. They do not respect what does not demand effort. And human nature, it worships what it has to earn and dismisses what is handed freely. And you kept giving, until giving wasn't a choice. It was your default. You became less a person, more a refuge, a breathing shelter for other people's chaos, their emotional landfill, and no one noticed you were eroding. This isn't comfort. This isn't therapy. This is confrontation. If you still think goodness is its own reward, pause. Not all love is sacred. Not all sacrifice is noble. Some of it is slow. Polite suicide. And if something in your chest is stirring right now, it isn't anger. It isn't sadness. It's your strategist waking up. You were never weak, only loyal to the wrong doctrine. From this moment forward, you will no longer love blindly. You will no longer give like a peasant praying for acceptance. You will give like a ruler strategic, sovereign, and unforgettable. No one chooses to be invisible. No one dreams of becoming the one who always gives and never gets. But somehow, it happens. And more often than not, it happens to the kindest souls. Not because they're weak, but because somewhere along the way, they learned a dangerous rule. Love must be earned through self-erasure. This belief doesn't start in adulthood. It begins in silence. In childhood bedrooms, where emotions were too loud for the room, where a little boy realizes he's praised when he fixes everyone's mess, but shamed when he speaks his truth. Where a little girl learns that if she doesn't cry, she's strong, but if she needs something, she's too much. They don't call it trauma. They call it being easy, helpful, low maintenance. But underneath those words is a child shrinking themselves to survive. So they grow up, and they don't stop giving. Because giving is the only language they were taught to speak. They offer energy without asking. They absorb chaos to keep the peace. They sacrifice sleep, sanity, and so not because they want to, but because saying no feels like betrayal. Because somewhere deep inside, they still believe they must overcompensate just to be allowed to stay. Over time, it metastasizes. They don't just give time, they give themselves. They shapeshift to please rooms that never deserved their presence. They smile through emotional theft. They become the mirror that reflects what others want to see, until they no longer recognize the outline of their own identity. This isn't kindness. It's survival. It's an emotional hostage situation wrapped in polite behavior. And the world. It rewards this pain with applause. You're so strong. You're always there. You're the rock. But no one asks what happens to the rock when it's been eroded by waves for decades. When strength becomes a tomb, Machiavelli wouldn't see this as virtue. He'd see it as emotional submission. Because when your value is measured by how much you tolerate, you become predictable. And what's predictable is easy to manipulate. A resource, not a force. The tragedy is systemic. Overgiving isn't just tolerated, it's normalized. In jobs that exploit your loyalty without compensation. In families that praise your silence while draining your spirit. In cultures that idolize martyrs but forget their names. And when the overgiver collapses, not with drama, but with a whisper no one notices, because everyone got used to the quiet, to the availability, to the soft disappearance. You may think this is love, that this is selflessness, but ask yourself, if your kindness requires your vanishing, is it still kindness, or is it strategic self-abandonment? Here's the truth. You can't heal what you refuse to name. And overgiving isn't a virtue. It's a survival script that has long outlived its purpose. Like a war strategy built for a battlefield that no longer exists. It must be dismantled, or it will dismantle you. But awareness is your first revolution. And you just started one. If this truth reflected something you've lived through, type the word fire in the comments. Someone out there needs to hear it too. What sentence in this segment hit you the hardest? Let us know below. We read every single comment. If you'd like to support the team behind this channel, click the super thanks button. Every contribution helps us continue crafting content that cuts deeper than the surface. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, especially if you're ready to rewrite your story and start leading instead of merely surviving. Picture this. A little boy, barely tall enough to reach the shelf, gives away his favorite toy. Not because he wants to, but because he's afraid the fighting around him won't stop unless he sacrifices something he loves. Or a little girl who bites her lip through pain and smiles for approval. She doesn't say she's hurting, because someone once praised her for being strong. That's when it begins. Not with trauma, but with conditioning. They don't teach boundaries. They teach compliance. They don't reward authenticity. They reward silence. And that silence grows teeth. That child becomes the student who doesn't raise their hand even when they know the answer for fear of being too much. They become the adult who apologizes before speaking. The friend who listens more than they're ever heard. The worker who stays late, gets overlooked, then says, "Thank you for the opportunity." This isn't humility. It's programming. You are handed a script, a moral myth packaged as virtue. Don't be selfish. Be the bigger person. Forgive quickly. Nice people finish last, but at least they're good. But what they didn't tell you was that the script wasn't written to empower you. It was written to control you. Because a child who fears disappointing others grows into a citizen who never says no, and a person trained to self-abandon becomes the perfect cog in a machine that feeds on quiet obedience. Machiavelli would not have seen this as morality. He would have called it what it is. Design. A system of social engineering built to benefit the few at the cost of the many. A ruler who is too generous will eventually be forced to rob someone else. Not because generosity is wicked, but because unconditional giving creates emptiness, and emptiness invites collapse. Look around. Even your childhood fairy tales were loaded. The noble character who gives everything dies. The villain who protects themselves wins. You internalize the lie that your suffering makes you holy, that the more you endure, the more deserving you become. That if you're endlessly soft, someone will finally choose you. But the world doesn't reward softness. It exploits it unless it's backed by boundaries. The kindest hearts become footnotes. The most giving people become background noise. Not because they weren't worthy, but because they were too accessible. Because here's the truth, Machiavelli knew, and the world still hides. People don't value goodness. They value rarity. They respect distance. They crave what they cannot predict. So when you show up every time, when you forgive before they ask, when you smile through neglect and still offer warmth, you become forgettable, expected, replaceable. And that's the most dangerous illusion, that selflessness equals strength. But true strength isn't the absence of needs. It's the clarity to protect them. So let me say it plainly. You were not taught to be kind. You were trained to be compliant. And in a system designed for your obedience, your silence was always the goal. From this point forward, that ends, he who lays down his sword to prove he means no harm still bleeds when cut. Unwritten, but understood by every manipulator who ever smiled at a giver. So next time someone calls you selfless, ask yourself, or am I just unprotected? Overgiving isn't just exhausting, it's eroding, not in flames, but in drips, like water carving through stone, subtle, patient, and irreversible. At first, it wears the mask of strength. You're the reliable one, the steady hand, the strong friend. But beneath that role, the rot begins. You say yes while your gut pleads no. You smile at people who quietly extract your soul. You help because it's expected, then hate yourself for doing it again. And they call it kindness, generosity, selflessness. As if these were praises, not eulogies. But no one sees that behind the smile. You're holding your breath, biting your tongue, trading your sanity for temporary peace. This isn't burnout. This is something darker, something quieter. This is identity collapse. You stop being a person. You become a role, a function, a caretaker, a sponge, a therapist for the emotionally irresponsible. And that role, if left unchecked, will bury you in plain sight. Psychologists have a name for it. Fawning, a trauma response where love is confused with overcompensation, where survival means tuning your nervous system to the needs of everyone but yourself. You sense discomfort before it's spoken. You apologize for needing rest. You rehearse the word no in your head, but still whisper yes out loud. Machiavelli wouldn't pity you. He wouldn't say, "You're too nice." He'd say, "A servant who forgets they are human becomes furniture." Because when you're always available, your absence stops mattering, and your presence is no longer a gift. It's just expected. The damage doesn't scream. It whispers, in the way you smile when someone interrupts you, in how you explain yourself before you've even done anything wrong, in the tightening in your chest when someone says, "Can I ask a favor?" You want to be seen, but you keep performing like you're invisible. You want someone to ask if you're okay, but you've trained them not to. You keep giving, hoping someone will notice, but they won't, because you taught them not to. And here's the paradox. You're drowning, but you're so good at appearing calm, no one throws a rope. Overgiving isn't noble. It's invisible suicide. One silent compromise at a time. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility, because once numbness takes over, you don't just lose your energy, you lose something deeper. You lose your fire, your instinct, your inner compass. And soon, you won't even know where the real you ends and the programming begins. So if you're feeling hollow right now, if your chest is tight and your heart feels blurred, that isn't weakness. That's clarity breaking through. You're not too emotional. You're just unprotected. And from this moment on, that changes. It's one of the most bitter truths to swallow. The people you gave the most to are often the first to disrespect you. And your instinct is to blame yourself. Maybe you didn't give enough. Maybe you were too cold. Maybe if you had just been a little more patient, they would have stayed. But listen closely. You didn't lose their respect because you failed. You lost it because you gave too much. Too freely. In human psychology, there is a ruthless equation. What is free is rarely valued. What is consistent is eventually ignored. What is unconditional is often exploited. The people you kept giving to, they stopped seeing it as generosity. They saw it as your role, a permanent feature of their comfort. Like light in a room they never paid the bill for. You believed your love was building a bond. But in their eyes, you became replaceable. Why? Because you never made them earn you. Machiavelli knew this. He wrote of princes who offered too much loyalty too soon, only to be betrayed by the very nobles they elevated. A ruler who shows too much kindness without consequence invites contempt. Not devotion. It's not malice. It's human nature. People crave what is rare, what demands effort, what sets terms. When you overgive, you fracture the balance of power. Not in status, but in perception. You become the first to call, the last to leave. The one who forgives before there's even an apology. The one who over-explains, even when you're the one hurt. And through repetition, a message is sent, not with words, but with your pattern. I will absorb this. I will tolerate this. I'll keep showing up. Even if you don't. You didn't say those words, but you didn't have to. Your actions screamed them louder than your voice ever could. Here's the cruel part. You didn't do it to be controlled. You did it to protect the connection. You didn't want power. You wanted love. You wanted peace. But in trying to save the relationship, you abandoned yourself. They didn't betray your kindness. They responded to the value system you silently taught them. Because when someone receives endlessly without accountability, they begin to assume the supply is infinite. So let me ask you, have you ever felt most disposable to the very people you were the most loyal to? If the answer is yes, don't rush to shame. Sit with that. Let it be a signal not of your inadequacy, but of your generosity misused. Respect does not come from how much you love. It comes from how clearly you protect your worth. Even the most empathetic soul becomes invisible if they refuse to be scarce. Because anything that is always available becomes background noise. Machiavelli would never say, "Don't love." He'd say, "Let love follow respect. If you cannot be both, be the one who commands presence before affection." And in the modern world, that means this. Be respected first, then let love earn its place. Because the one who can leave without noise is always the one they fear losing most. Not all giving is weakness, but all uncalculated giving becomes a liability. In a world ruled by perception, your kindness isn't judged by your intent, but by your timing, your selectiveness, and your control. And no one understood this better than Machiavelli. He never told rulers to be cruel. He told them to be deliberate. A prince must appear generous, but never to the point of being drained. He must give with purpose so that people remember the gesture, but never grow dependent on it. This is how you give like a ruler. 1. Give rarely, but when you do, make it unforgettable. Most people give constantly out of guilt. out of fear, out of habit. But what's constant loses impact. True power lies in contrast. Think of Alexander the Great. He didn't reward his soldiers every day. But when he did, he burned his royal robes and marched with them barefoot. That one act echoed through history. Your kindness should feel like rain in a desert, not like tap water on demand. Let them earn the silence before the storm. Let your absence create tension. Then give once like thunder. Memorable, strategic, unmistakable. 2. Your no increases the price of your yes. When you always say yes, people stop hearing gratitude. They hear expectation. But when your boundaries are clear, your approval becomes currency. Your time becomes a ceremony. And that scarcity is leverage. Machiavelli would say, he who controls access controls the game. The one who can vanish without explanation becomes the one whose presence carries gravity. 3. Give to move the board, not to soothe your guilt. Most overgivers don't give out of confidence. They give to feel necessary, to be irreplaceable. But true influence doesn't rescue it. Repositions. Before you give, ask yourself, is this strengthening me or draining me? Does this increase my influence or reduce it? Would I still give if I knew it changed nothing? If fear is behind the gesture, pause. You're not giving, you're bargaining with your self-worth. 4. Keep score. Quietly. This isn't revenge. It's intelligence. Who shows up without being asked? Who disappears after they've taken? Who only calls when they need something? You don't need to confront. You need to adjust access. Machiavelli didn't fear betrayal. He anticipated it. And he'd remind you, generosity without memory is generosity without wisdom. 5. Make generosity your weapon, not your weakness. Let it surprise. Let it land like lightning. A rare act of kindness, calculated and clean, can shift alliances, open doors, reshape perception. That's how rulers move people. Not through endless availability, but through unpredictable benevolence. Give like a sword drawn only at the right moment. Give like a storm never forecasted, but unforgettable when it arrives. And if you've ever felt used for your light, don't dim it. Direct it. Aim it like fire through fog. Because when you master the art of scarcity, every act becomes monumental. You don't need to stop giving. You need to engineer it. Machiavelli would nod. Not because you became colder, but because you finally became sovereign. You've done the work. You've drawn boundaries. You've said no more than you ever believed you could. But something still doesn't feel right. Because overgiving doesn't just live in your calendar. It lives in your nervous system. Just because you've stopped sacrificing your time doesn't mean you've stopped betraying yourself. Let's be honest. 1. You still feel guilty for choosing yourself. You cancel a plan to rest, but spend the evening spiraling in your head. You say no, then replay it for hours like a courtroom cross-examination. You wonder, are they upset? Did I disappoint them? Will they leave? That's not boundaries. That's self-protection, dressed as politeness. A child who feared rejection becomes an adult who fears self-preservation. Machiavelli would call this emotional vulnerability without armor the weakest position in any negotiation. 2. You over-explain your boundaries. You say, I can't, but rush to soften the blow. I'm just overwhelmed. I've had a rough week. I promise I'll make it up to you. But why? Because part of you still believes your no must be earned. Still thinks your limits are an inconvenience. Still ties your worth to your availability. Every explanation you give is a subtle apology for existing, 3. You shrink around confident people. When someone enters the room certain of themselves, you shrink. You hesitate. You start editing your words mid-sentence. You call it humility. But it's programming. You were taught that power is dangerous, that taking up space comes with punishment. So you become agreeable, pleasant, forgettable. But Machiavelli would say, what dims itself to survive teaches others to forget its fire. And what's forgotten is always undervalued. 4. Receiving still makes you uncomfortable. They compliment you, you deflect. They give you a gift, you say it wasn't necessary. They offer help, you insist, I'm fine. Really, not because you're ungrateful, but because somewhere deep down, you believe you haven't earned it. Or worse, you fear you'll have to pay it back. You were trained to be the giver, the rescuer, the anchor. So, when care flows toward you, it feels like a setup. 5. You wait to be rescued, without asking. You're exhausted, but you still say, I'm okay. You smile. You power through. But quietly, you're hoping someone will just notice, that they'll sense your fatigue, that they'll read the silence beneath your smile, that they'll finally say, are you really okay? But they don't, and you feel unseen, abandoned, maybe even angry. But here's the paradox. You never gave them the map. You never said the words, because asking feels like weakness, because long ago, you learned your needs were a burden. Let's call this what it is. Residual loyalty to the role you once played to survive. The giver, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the quiet one. But that role, it's expired. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself that sacrificed everything in silence. You don't owe the world a smile when your soul is collapsing. You don't owe endless understanding in exchange for crumbs of attention. So if any of this feels uncomfortably familiar, you're not broken. You're waking up. These aren't flaws. They're flickers of awareness breaking through the cage of who you were taught to be. You've stopped giving blindly. Now it's time to stop feeling bad for finally choosing yourself. So what happens after you stop overgiving? What's left when the masks fall and the old roles turn to ash? The answer is both terrifying and liberating. You rebuild, but this time, not as the servant, not as the rescuer, not as the one who bends to survive. You rebuild as a sovereign, a ruler, of your time, of your mind, of your presence. And that rebuild begins with one simple shift. No one enters your inner kingdom unless they're tested at the gates. 1. Redraw your internal map. Close your eyes. Picture your life as a citadel, not metaphorically, literally. There are rooms, chambers, sanctuaries. Now ask yourself, who have you let in without credentials? Who's resting in your inner sanctum without ever earning their place? It's time to move people. Shift their access. Not out of bitterness, but precision. Some were always meant to stay in the courtyard. Some never deserved to step past the gate. This is not cruelty. This is governance. 2. Replace sacrifice with standards. Stop offering your soul as a down payment for connection. Stop bleeding in private, just to appear generous in public. From now on, you don't give access. You give criteria. If they rise to meet it, welcome. If not, gate stays shut. As Machiavelli might say, better to be respected at a distance than loved up close by those who violate your sovereignty. 3. Speak less. Observe more. You don't need to announce your evolution. You don't need to defend your new boundaries. Let your silence do the talking. Let your absence echo, because the loudest shift is always the quietest. Watch how they respond when your light is no longer on tap. Some will adjust, Some will vanish. Good. That's the filtration system working. 4. Make your presence earned. Not expected. You are not an emotional vending machine. Not a therapist for chaos collectors. Not a 24/7 refuge for anyone who snaps their fingers. Your time is sacred. Your care is elite. Treat it that way. Because what's always available is perceived as replaceable. And you were never meant to be ordinary. 5. Practice visible self-worth. Let the world feel your shift in your walk. In your voice. In your choices. You're no longer afraid to disappoint. You're no longer available for guilt-driven loyalty. You're no longer performing kindness in exchange for crumbs of connection. You're here to reign. With kindness. With clarity. With teeth. Because true power isn't about dominating others. It's about never being dominated by your own self-doubt again. This is your new architecture. Fewer people. Deeper standards. More silence. Sharper boundaries. Less apology. Greater clarity. You don't need to be mean. You need to be mathematically selective. You don't need to become bitter. You need to become unavailable for anything beneath your standard. Machiavelli would not call this selfishness. He would call it what it is: sovereignty. If you've made it here, you are no longer the same person who pressed play. You've seen it. The cost of blind generosity. The hollow ache of disappearing behind a smile. The truth that kindness, without calculation, becomes a weapon turned inward. And now you stand at a threshold. The world will still ask you to shrink, to give more, to explain, to contort yourself for people who were never meant to walk beside you. But that version of you, the one who tolerated to be loved, the one who stayed silent just to be chosen, is gone. You are no longer available for relationships that confuse loyalty with submission. You are no longer available for apologies you didn't owe. You are no longer available for your own self-betrayal. From this moment forward, you give from overflow, not from emptiness. You disappear when your value is ignored. You measure access, not just affection. You protect your peace, even if it costs connection. Because your kindness is no longer cheap. It is curated, sharpened, delivered with discernment. Let this be your creed. I will not bleed to prove I'm real. I will not give to those who only take. I will not confuse being used with being needed. You are not broken. You were loyal to a system that profited from your self-doubt. But today you rewrite the terms. Not with anger, not with noise, with precision, with silence, with strategy. Because from this moment on, you don't just survive. You reign,